Hey, let's start the show with some trade discussion thoughts. We talked yesterday when it dropped and freaked out about it, to be honest, with the Quinn and Williams. Well, it was first the Sauce Gardner trade, and you and I talked about that. We talked about Rashid Shaheed a little bit. We talked about Jacoby Myers going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So we've talked about those trades. You and Max talked about the Quinn and Williams trade and sort of what that meant. Is there anything else from a trade deadline perspective that maybe a move that was made that we didn't hit on yet, or maybe some moves that weren't made, right? Because yesterday was all about talking about the moves that were made. Were there any moves that were not made that surprised you in the NFL trade deadline?
I think when you look at moves not made, to me, you still look at the New York Jets, actually. And Breece Hall is still a New York Jet. Jermaine Johnson, right. Quincy Williams, those guys are still Jets. And look, there were offers on the table, especially for Hall and Johnson. The rumors are that the Kansas City Chiefs had an offer of a fourth-round pick out there for Breece Hall, but Darren Mucci and the Jets were insistent that they get a third. And you saw that even with their big trades. They're going to get fair or better value for these trades. There were a couple offers on the table for Jermaine Johnson from the 49ers and from the Bears, who really need pass rush help, but they didn't satisfy the second round asking price. So Darren Mucci, I think it's a very interesting approach where he could have sold off everybody from this team, especially on the defensive side of the ball, but there's still good young football players, especially when you talk about Hall and Johnson, that could help him for the next 2, 3, 4 years if you do re-sign them in the offseason. Hall's in the last year of his contract, Johnson going into one more. But, I think when you look at it from that angle, he didn't feel the need to trade these guys unless they got fair or better value. I think they certainly got fair value in the Gardner trade. And I don't know about you, Trev. I really feel like they won the Quinn and Williams trade.
Yeah, I think, honestly, for where the Jets are and what their both short and long-term outlook is, I think they won both of those trades. I think the value, again, getting what you got out of the Quinn and Williams trade, I think that one is a little bit easier to say it's a win. And even though you're giving up Sauce Gardner, one of the best cornerbacks in the game, you're getting 2 first-round picks back. I mean, that's quarterback or pass rusher type of return that you're getting there. So it hurts to lose a player of his caliber, but the Jets clearly are not a great team right now, and selling off those probably the most talented players that they have on their team, depending on where you have Garrett Wilson in that conversation, the team was not going to look similar next year anyway. So if these guys weren't part of your plans in any way, shape, or form, it makes sense to get something for them. That's also why I am a little surprised that they didn't move Breece, because maybe they just didn't want to give the Kansas City Chiefs more talent. I don't know. Maybe that's what it was. But Darren Mucci, he comes from the Denver Broncos, so maybe he's like, nah, I'm not just going to give this guy away to the Kansas City Chiefs here. But a fourth-round pick compared to a third-round pick. Obviously, it's a full round, and I think that this was more about standing your ground in terms of your value of what you thought of a player, but it's also a little bit like Miami. We need to talk about the Miami Dolphins, too, and I kind of rope them into this conversation because they move on from Jalen Phillips. I can understand them not moving on from Jalen Waddle. That one I totally get. But Bradley Chubb still being on this roster, it doesn't really do anything for you. And I think that you're probably going to move on from Bradley Chubb this offseason anyways. And the same thing with Breece Hall. It felt like ever since Aaron Glenn got to New York, Breece Hall's spot on this roster and who he represented and what he represented within the offense, I should say, was sort of up for debate and up in the air, to where I would be floored if they re-signed Breece Hall at this point, especially with him on Twitter, basically saying like, okay, like you're trading all my friends, you're trading all the good players. I want out of here. The NFL shelf life for a running back isn't very long anyways. And so to me, that's the one where I go, okay, not bending the knee to just give anything away for Jermaine Johnson, who we were told that there was an offer on the table for him. And I get that one. I don't as much get the Breece Hall one, outside of just saying, hey, I'm not going to be known as a GM around the NFL that is just going to cave when it comes to the value that I have set for my players. So I can understand the principle side of it there, but I really would have thought that, all things considered, Breece Hall would be on a different team today.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and it still makes me then wonder if there is a possibility. He's still only 24 years old, so it's not like you can't get a few more years out of him. I do wonder if there is a possibility where they go, you know what, he's played well this year behind this offensive line that we built in the offseason, 2 young tackles, all of that. Maybe he is a guy that we can, kind of think of as, if you think about that Lions offense and what they've done with Montgomery and Gibbs over there, get a second guy in there or hope Braylon Allen gets healthier, keep drafting backs and create that committee. But Breece Hall's shown he can be a workhorse as long as he's not fumbling the football or dropping it in the passing game. I think he can be one of the better, obviously, maybe even one of the best two-way backs in football behind this offensive line. So if they're trying to build it that way and still have a functional offense, at least running the ball next year, then Hall could be a big part of that. I think it may be a little closer at this point than you think, but I do think there is a part of this where Muji's just going, listen, these guys are young enough and good enough where they can still help me. I don't have to trade anything. I don't have to do anything. You have to. He's making the buyers go out and go, okay, you have to live up to this price that I'm asking you to pay, right? And if you don't do it, I'm not just going to sell guys off just to do it, especially young players.
Yeah. Broncos not doing anything at the trade deadline either. There was some talk of them maybe being in the wide receiver market. They don't get involved there. Obviously, Olave doesn't get moved. Jalen Waddle doesn't get moved. Jacoby did, but he ended up going to Jacksonville. And I feel like Rashid Shaheed probably would have been the guy that the Broncos would have been targeting. He ends up going to the Seattle Seahawks. So Broncos not doing anything. Chiefs not doing anything. Bills not doing anything. Did any of those teams? The Chargers made a last-second move trading for Trevor Penning there as their offensive line is so beat up. So I don't hate that move. I really don't. I don't know how much it moves the needle for me, to be honest. But I don't hate them at least saying, hey, we've got a quarterback who's playing incredibly well right now. Let's try to do whatever we can to make sure that offensive line is as good as it could possibly be, maybe getting into the postseason there for them. So the only team that I'm really surprised wasn't more active was Miami, to be honest. So the rest of them I can understand. They're contenders. They're not just going to give away their draft picks for anything. And clearly we kind of have learned that there may have been some offers in there, just not as rich as the sellers would have wanted them to be. So I'm most surprised with the Dolphins' inactivity. But what do you think?
The Dolphins, yes, and I think the other big name for me is we didn't see Trey Hendrickson get traded from Cincinnati, and I after the last 2 losses that they've had, and he was hurt last week, and their defense obviously is what's costing them games right now, and that's even with Hendrickson on the field for as great a pass rusher as he is. I'm just surprised that they held firm on what seemed to be a first-round asking price for him for a 30-year-old pass rusher who is extremely good. Don't get me wrong, he would have changed the complexion of somebody's defense had he gotten traded, but I'm just surprised the Bengals are just standing pat as well, because after losing these 2 games to the Jets and the Bears, it's painfully clear that defensively they just can't get it done. They're not going to the postseason with this team, and Hendrickson is likely on the way out in the offseason. I don't really get that part either of the Bengals hanging on to Trey.
Yeah, I mean, it only makes sense if you're going to sign him long term, and obviously he's going to be a major player for you in the next couple of years, right? Like while you have the wide receivers, when Joe Burrow gets healthy again, this makes sense if you feel as though it is much more likely that you're going to give Trey Hendrickson what he wants in a deal this offseason than it is to let him go. Because if that's the case, then I go, okay, like I can understand you standing firm on a first round pick or nothing. But if it's up in the air at all whatsoever, and you're going to lose Trey Hendrickson, the best that you're going to get is a comp pick back of a 3rd-round pick. At that point, yeah, you go, okay, well, why aren't you moving him for a second then? If there's any possibility that could be the case, then I can understand, especially with the season basically gone for Cincinnati now at this point. I mean, you're playing a lot of young guys anyways. Clearly, it's a building year in a lot of ways while Joe Burrow gets healthy, and you're kind of trying to hit the ground running next season. And again, keeping Trey makes sense if you are going to sign him and he's going to be a part of a team that you're going to think is going to compete for the top of the division in a playoff spot next year when Joe Burrow's healthy. But if it's 50-50, if it's up in the air, if it's like, maybe he'll be back, maybe he won't. Yeah, I would have dealt him for a 2nd-round pick yesterday. So we will see. The time will tell, and I think the contract will mean a lot for the Trey Hendrickson situation there.